A store owner called the cops on a black customer, thinking he had everything under control. But just 5 minutes later, something happened that turned his entire world upside down. What went wrong? You won't believe how this ends. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more. It was a busy afternoon at Grant's Grocery, a small corner store nestled in a quiet neighborhood. The store was packed with regular customers, many chatting as they shopped for their weekly essentials. Behind the counter stood Mr. Grant, the owner, a man who prided himself on running his business the old-fashioned way. He carefully watched every customer who entered, his sharp eyes scanning for anything he deemed unusual. It wasn't unusual for him to scrutinize people. In his mind, it was just good business. But today, his focus was sharper than usual. The bell above the door chimed, and a young man named Marcus walked in. He had a confident air about him, dressed neatly in a button-up shirt and carrying a small backpack slung over one shoulder. He greeted the cashier with a polite nod and grabbed a shopping basket from the stand near the entrance. Mr. Grant stiffened. He didn't recognize Marcus, and his mind immediately raced with assumptions. New faces always made him uneasy, but something about Marcus unsettled him even more. Mr. Grant barely noticed the stream of other customers walking in and out, his eyes now locked on Marcus. Marcus moved down the aisles with a calm demeanor, pausing occasionally to pick up a box of cereal or a can of soup. He pulled out his phone, tapping a few notes as he checked items off his shopping list. Mr. Grant leaned forward slightly, narrowing his eyes as he watched. "What's he doing with that phone?" he muttered under his breath. The way Marcus glanced at the shelves and then back at his phone only fueled his suspicions. It didn't matter that Marcus was doing nothing out of the ordinary. Mr. Grant had already made up his mind. As Marcus turned down the refrigerated section to grab a carton of milk, Mr. Grant stepped out from behind the counter. His heart pounded, but he told himself it was just adrenaline. "You've got to stay on top of these things," he thought. He approached Marcus slowly, the heavy soles of his shoes clunking against the tiled floor. Marcus, oblivious to the attention, was reading the label on a juice bottle when Mr. Grant's voice cut through the air. "What do you think you're doing?" Mr. Grant's tone was sharp, his words loud enough to turn a few heads nearby. Marcus looked up, startled. He blinked, confused for a moment before replying, "I'm just shopping." He held up his basket as if to prove his point, the items inside clearly unpaid but untouched. Mr. Grant's suspicion only deepened. "That backpack of yours," he said, pointing at it. "What's in there? You think I didn't notice you looking around like that? Trying to sneak something into your bag, huh?" His voice grew louder, attracting even more attention. Marcus froze, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "Excuse me? I'm not stealing anything," he said firmly but respectfully. "I can show you what's in my bag if you want, but I'm just here to buy groceries." Mr. Grant waved him off. "I don't need your excuses," he said. "I've seen this before. People like you think you can walk in here and take whatever you want without paying. Well, not in my store." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Marcus's face hardened. He stood his ground, his voice calm but firm. "I haven't done anything wrong. You're making a mistake." The tension in the store was palpable now. Customers had stopped browsing to watch the scene unfold. A woman standing nearby quietly pulled out her phone, hitting the record button as Mr. Grant jabbed his finger toward Marcus. "I've had enough of this," he snapped, storming toward the counter to grab the phone. He dialed the police, loudly announcing that there was a shoplifter refusing to leave. Marcus stood still, his grip tightening on the basket. His mind raced, not because he was guilty, but because he couldn't believe this was happening. As he looked around, he noticed the eyes of other shoppers, some filled with pity, others with judgment. He took a deep breath, knowing he'd done nothing wrong, but as Mr. Grant barked into the phone, Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. This situation was about to spiral out of control, and he wasn't sure what would happen next. Minutes felt like hours as Marcus stood in the middle of the store gripping his basket tightly. The tension in the room was suffocating, with every pair of eyes locked on him. A mother shopping with her child gave him a small, sympathetic glance, but quickly turned away when Mr. Grant shot her a sharp look. The sound of sirens in the distance grew louder, making Marcus's heart pound in his chest. He wasn't scared of the truth. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong, but he also knew how quickly situations like this could escalate. The police car screeched to a halt in front of the store. 2 officers stepped out, one of them adjusting his belt as he surveyed the scene through the glass doors. Mr. Grant stood near the entrance, his arms crossed, his face flushed with self-righteous anger. As the officers entered, he greeted them with an air of authority, quickly launching into his version of events. "I caught him red-handed," Mr. Grant said, jabbing his thumb toward Marcus. "He's been sneaking around my store, acting suspicious, probably trying to pocket some of the merchandise. I've had problems like this before, so I know how to spot it." The taller officer, a man in his 40s with a calm demeanor, raised his hand to silence Mr. Grant. "Let's handle this one step at a time," he said. He turned to Marcus, his tone neutral. "Sir, would you mind explaining what happened here?" Marcus met the officer's gaze, his voice steady but laced with frustration. "I came here to shop," he said, lifting the basket slightly to show its contents. "I've got a list, and I've been checking it on my phone, that's all. He's accusing me of stealing for no reason." The officer nodded slowly, taking in Marcus's words. He glanced at the basket, then at Marcus's calm expression. "Do you have any items in your backpack?" he asked, his tone professional but firm. Marcus exhaled deeply. "No," he said, slipping the backpack off his shoulder. "I'll open it if you want." He unzipped it and held it open for both officers to see. Inside were only a water bottle, a notebook, and a set of keys. The officers exchanged a quick glance, their expressions softening. Mr. Grant, however, wasn't ready to back down. "That doesn't prove anything," he barked, his voice rising. "He could have put something back when he saw me watching him." The officer turned back to Mr. Grant, his expression growing firmer. "Do you have any evidence that this man stole something? Did you see him take anything?" Mr. Grant hesitated, his confidence faltering for the first time. "Well, no," he admitted reluctantly, "but I know how these things go. People like him—" "Excuse me?" a voice interrupted sharply. A woman stepped forward holding her phone up. It was the same customer who had been quietly recording. "People like him?" she repeated, her tone cutting. "I've been standing here the whole time and all I've seen is him shopping like anyone else. This is ridiculous." A murmur of agreement rippled through the small crowd of customers. Several others nodded, voicing their support for Marcus. Mr. Grant's face reddened as he realized he was losing control of the situation. The taller officer raised his hand again to quiet the room. "All right," the officer said, addressing the crowd. "If anyone has footage or first-hand accounts of what happened, we'd like to see it." The woman stepped forward, handing her phone to the second officer. "I've got everything right here," she said. The officer began reviewing the video, the room falling silent as everyone watched his reaction. As the footage played, the officers exchanged a brief but telling look. The taller officer turned to Marcus. "It appears there's no evidence against you," he said. "You're free to go." Marcus's shoulders relaxed slightly, though his face still showed the tension of the situation. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady but cold. He turned to leave, but the officer held up a hand. "One more thing," the officer said, now addressing Mr. Grant. "Sir, based on what we've seen and heard, you made these accusations without any substantial proof. That's a serious matter. False accusations can have real consequences." Mr. Grant opened his mouth to protest but quickly closed it when the officer's gaze sharpened. The crowd, emboldened by the officer's words, began murmuring louder, their frustration with Mr. Grant growing more evident by the second. The officer's words hung in the air like a warning, and for the first time Mr. Grant looked genuinely unsettled. Marcus stepped outside, the warm sunlight hitting his face as the tension in his chest finally began to ease. But he knew this wasn't over. Inside, Mr. Grant stood frozen, the weight of his choices slowly sinking in as the store grew quieter, customers glaring at him with disdain. As Marcus walked away from the store, the stares of the lingering crowd followed him, but he held his head high. He hadn't done anything wrong, and he wasn't going to let this situation define him. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled out his phone to text a friend, recounting the incident in a few short sentences. The rage simmering under his calm exterior began to bubble. This isn't just about me, he thought. How many others has he done this to? Meanwhile, inside the store, the tension was still thick. Customers were exchanging whispers and shaking their heads. One by one, they started putting their items back on the shelves and walking out. Mr. Grant stood frozen behind the counter, watching the exodus with disbelief. A few loyal customers remained, avoiding his gaze as they quietly paid for their purchases and left without a word. His confidence, which had seemed unshakable earlier, began to crack. One of the officers approached him again, his tone firm but controlled. "Mr. Grant," he said, "I suggest you think carefully about your actions going forward. Incidents like these don't just disappear, especially with the amount of attention this one is getting. False accusations can damage more than just reputations." As the officers exited the store, Mr. Grant found himself standing alone in the empty aisles. The cashier, a young woman named Sophie, hesitated behind the counter, avoiding eye contact. She had been working there for nearly 2 years and had seen Grant's behavior before, though she had always stayed quiet. This time, however, she couldn't hold back. "Mr. Grant," she began hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper, "I think you really messed up today." He snapped his head toward her, his eyes narrowing. "Excuse me?" he barked, his temper flaring again. Sophie took a deep breath and continued, her voice shaking slightly. "Marcus didn't do anything wrong. You embarrassed him, scared the other customers, and made the whole situation worse. People aren't going to forget this. You know that, right?" Her words hit him like a slap, but he dismissed her with a wave of his hand. "You don't know what you're talking about," he muttered. "I was protecting my store. If they don't like it, they can go somewhere else." Sophie shook her head, biting back the response she wanted to give. Instead, she grabbed her bag from under the counter and said quietly, "Well, they are going somewhere else, and I think I will too. I quit." Before Mr. Grant could respond, she turned and walked out, leaving him standing alone in the silent store. Outside, Marcus sat on a bench nearby, his phone buzzing with notifications. The woman who had recorded the video had shared it on social media, and it was quickly gaining traction. Comments flooded in, some from people in the neighborhood who recognized the store and shared their own experiences with Mr. Grant's unfair treatment. Others came from strangers who were outraged by the blatant bias on display. As Marcus scrolled through the growing thread, a local activist group reached out to him, asking if they could help bring more attention to the issue. Marcus hesitated for a moment, unsure if he wanted to be at the center of such a storm. But then he thought about the way Mr. Grant had looked at him, as though he was guilty before he'd even spoken a word. That look wasn't new, and he knew others had faced it too. Marcus typed a quick reply. "Let's do it." Back at the store, the empty aisles and deafening silence finally began to gnaw at Mr. Grant. He sat on a stool behind the counter, staring blankly at the door as it swung open and shut with the occasional breeze. His thoughts raced, but he couldn't seem to pin down exactly what had gone wrong. In his mind, he was still convinced he had done the right thing, even as doubt started to creep in. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar. Fear, not for his safety, but for the future of his business. The next morning, Mr. Grant unlocked the store as usual, but the atmosphere felt different. The street outside was unusually quiet, and for the first time in years, there was no line of early morning regulars waiting for coffee or pastries. He glanced around nervously, brushing it off as an off day, and flipped the open sign in the window. The hum of the refrigerators and the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights were the only sounds in the store. As the morning dragged on, only a few customers trickled in, their footsteps hesitant. Most of them didn't linger, and some left without buying anything at all. Mr. Grant noticed their wary glances, the way they avoided looking at him directly, and it made his skin crawl. He busied himself behind the counter, pretending not to notice, but deep down, unease settled into his chest. By midday, things took a turn for the worse. Sophie's abrupt resignation had left him short-staffed, and he struggled to manage the store alone. A delivery truck arrived with supplies, but the driver hesitated as he handed over the clipboard for Mr. Grant's signature. "Guess you've been seeing the comments online," the driver said casually, glancing at his phone. "What comments?" Mr. Grant asked sharply, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew. The driver raised an eyebrow. "About what happened yesterday. That video's everywhere, man. People are mad. Some are saying they're never shopping here again." Mr. Grant snatched the clipboard, muttering under his breath as he scribbled his signature. He waved the driver off, but the man's words lingered, buzzing in his ears like an annoying fly. As soon as the truck pulled away, Mr. Grant grabbed his phone and searched the store's name. What he saw made his stomach drop. Post after post criticized him for his treatment of Marcus, with hundreds of comments calling for a boycott of the store. The video, now with thousands of views, showed the entire incident in damning clarity. The woman's caption read, "This is what happens when prejudice replaces reason. This young man deserved better." Below it, users shared their own stories of being unfairly targeted by business owners or authority figures. Mr. Grant's hands trembled as he read through the flood of negative reviews that had popped up overnight. "Racist and rude owner," one comment read. "I've shopped there for years, but never again." Another said, "I've had similar experiences here, always watching certain people like hawks. Glad someone finally called him out." He slammed his phone down on the counter, his face flushed with anger. "This is out of control," he muttered. But even as he tried to dismiss it, he couldn't ignore the sharp pang of guilt creeping in. For years he had run his store his way, never caring much about what people thought of him. But this time, it wasn't just one angry customer or a small misunderstanding. This was bigger, louder, and impossible to brush aside. By late afternoon, the store was practically empty. Mr. Grant stood behind the counter, staring blankly at the clock as the minutes ticked by. He had never seen the place so deserted. A couple of young men passed by the storefront, peering inside but not entering. One of them pulled out his phone, snapped a picture of the empty aisles, and laughed before walking away. Mr. Grant clenched his fists, his frustration bubbling to the surface. In the quiet moments, his mind wandered back to the incident with Marcus. For the first time, he replayed it not as the proud store owner defending his business, but as an outsider watching himself through the lens of the video. The way he had spoken to Marcus, the assumptions he had made. It all felt different now, sharper, uglier. He quickly shook the thought away, refusing to let it take root. As the day came to a close, Mr. Grant locked up the store, his heart heavy. The street outside was still eerily quiet, save for the occasional passerby who glanced at the store with a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. For the first time, he felt the weight of his actions pressing down on him. Still, he couldn't bring himself to admit that he might have been wrong. He convinced himself it was just a rough patch, something he could ride out with time. But deep down, a small voice whispered that this was only the beginning of his troubles. The following morning, Mr. Grant arrived at the store to find a small group of people gathered outside. At first, he thought it might be customers waiting to come in, but as he got closer, he realized they weren't there to shop. They held signs, some with phrases like "Stop Racial Profiling" and "Boycott Grant's Grocery." His heart sank as he saw Marcus standing among them, talking to a few members of the group. "Great," Mr. Grant muttered under his breath, gripping his keys tightly as he approached the door. He tried to ignore the murmurs and pointed fingers as he unlocked it. The sound of a phone camera clicking made his skin crawl. He glanced over his shoulder, meeting Marcus's steady gaze. "You can't do this here," Mr. Grant snapped, his voice breaking the tense silence. "This is private property. I'll call the police if you don't leave." Marcus didn't flinch. His voice was calm but firm as he replied, "We're on the sidewalk, Mr. Grant. That's public property. We have every right to be here." A few people in the group nodded in agreement, their eyes fixed on Mr. Grant with quiet defiance. Mr. Grant felt a surge of frustration, but he knew he couldn't argue with the legality of it. Instead, he swung the door open and stormed inside, slamming it behind him. The group outside remained, their presence a thorn in his side that he couldn't ignore. Every time he glanced through the window, he saw more people stopping to join them, some even taking photos and sharing them online. The weight in his chest grew heavier with each passing minute. The hours dragged on, and the store remained eerily empty. A handful of customers trickled in, but the energy in the room was tense. Several people whispered among themselves, glancing nervously at the protesters outside. A few left without buying anything, shaking their heads as they passed by Mr. Grant. Around noon, Sophie returned, not to work but to join the protest. She stood beside Marcus, holding a sign that read, "Equal treatment for all." Mr. Grant saw her through the window and felt a sharp pang of betrayal. He had known Sophie since she was a teenager. How could she turn on him like this? Unable to take it anymore, he stepped outside, his anger boiling over. "Sophie!" he called out, his voice echoing down the street. "What are you doing out here? I gave you a job when no one else would." Sophie lowered her sign, her expression calm but resolute. "And I appreciated that," she said, her voice steady. "But that doesn't excuse what you did to Marcus or how you've treated people for years. I stayed quiet for too long. I can't do it anymore." Mr. Grant's face reddened as he looked around at the gathering crowd. More phones were raised, recording every word. "This is my store," he barked. "I've run this place for decades and I've always done what I thought was best for my business. I don't need a lecture from you or anyone else." Marcus stepped forward, his voice cutting through the rising tension. "No one's trying to take your store away, Mr. Grant. But you need to understand the harm you've caused. You accused me of something I didn't do because of the way I look. That's not just bad business, it's wrong." For a moment, Mr. Grant said nothing, his mind racing. The words stung not because they were harsh, but because they felt true. He clenched his fists, his pride refusing to let him back down. Instead, he turned sharply and went back inside, slamming the door behind him once more. The rest of the day was a blur. The protest outside grew steadily, drawing more attention from passers-by. Local news reporters showed up, their cameras pointed at the store as they interviewed Marcus and the other protesters. Mr. Grant stayed behind the counter, watching it all unfold through the window with a sinking feeling in his stomach. That night, as he closed up the store, he noticed something new. Flyers plastered on nearby lampposts and walls. They read, "Stand against injustice. Boycott Grant's Grocery." Below the bold letters was a link to the video of the incident, which had now amassed tens of thousands of views. Mr. Grant ripped one of the flyers down, crumpling it in his hand, but it didn't change the reality staring him in the face. His business, his reputation, his entire livelihood, everything he had worked for was crumbling, and for the first time he wasn't sure he could fix it. As he walked to his car, the voices of the protesters echoed in his ears, their chants a haunting reminder that the world was no longer willing to stay silent. Mr. Grant sat alone in his dimly lit living room that night, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. The day's events played over and over in his mind like a broken record. He couldn't shake the sight of Marcus's calm expression, the way Sophie had stood firm, or the growing crowd that had gathered outside his store. His hands clenched into fists as frustration bubbled to the surface. "It's not my fault," he muttered aloud to no one. "I was just doing what any business owner would do. I have the right to protect my property." But even as the words left his mouth, they felt hollow. Deep down, a flicker of doubt gnawed at him. He had run his store the same way for decades, but times were changing and he wasn't sure he knew how to adapt. The comments he'd read online earlier that day echoed in his head. People calling him a racist, a bully, someone who didn't deserve to run a business in their community. For the first time, he felt the weight of those words. He reached for his phone, scrolling through social media again, even though he knew it would only make him feel worse. The video of Marcus in the store had now reached over 100,000 views. Dozens of people had tagged his store's account in their posts, demanding answers, some even calling for his business license to be revoked. A local news outlet had picked up the story, airing interviews with customers who had experienced similar treatment. Their words stung the most because they confirmed what he had always refused to admit, that his actions had alienated the very people who had kept his store running. As he continued scrolling, he saw a new post from Marcus. It wasn't angry or accusatory like the others. Instead, it was thoughtful, even measured. Marcus had written, "This isn't about tearing someone down. It's about holding people accountable and making our community better. I hope Mr. Grant learns from this and takes the opportunity to change. That's all we want, fairness and respect for everyone." Mr. Grant stared at the post for a long time. He felt an odd mix of emotions, anger, guilt, and something else he couldn't quite name. Marcus had every reason to attack him, yet he hadn't. Instead, he was calling for something Mr. Grant had never considered: change. The thought made his chest tighten. He had always prided himself on being a pillar of the community, someone people could rely on. But now that image was crumbling, and he was faced with a question he wasn't sure how to answer. Had he ever truly been fair to the people he claimed to serve? The next morning, he woke up to find his phone buzzing with notifications again. This time, the messages weren't just about the protests. They were about his suppliers. Several had emailed him, citing reputational concerns as the reason they were terminating their contracts. One by one, he saw the pieces of his business slipping away. Without reliable suppliers, he couldn't stock his shelves, and without customers, it wouldn't matter even if he could. His phone rang, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was the landlord of the building his store occupied. With a heavy sigh, he answered, already dreading the conversation. "Mr. Grant." The landlord's voice was calm but firm. "I've been hearing about the situation at your store. I think it's best if we talk about your lease. This kind of negative attention isn't good for the property or the other tenants." Mr. Grant's heart sank. "What are you saying?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "I'm saying you need to find a way to resolve this quickly. Otherwise, I'll have to reconsider our agreement." The line went dead, and Mr. Grant sat there in stunned silence. For decades, he had believed that he was untouchable, that his store was an essential part of the community. But now, it felt like the entire world was against him, and he didn't know how to fight back. As he sat there, staring at the phone in his hand, a single thought crossed his mind. Maybe this wasn't just about the store. Maybe this was about him, about who he had become and the choices he had made. For the first time, he wondered if Marcus had been right all along. If change wasn't just something the community needed, it was something he needed too. The morning light filtered through the dusty blinds of Mr. Grant's office, casting streaks of pale yellow across his cluttered desk. He sat there, staring blankly at a stack of bills he hadn't yet paid, each one marked with a bright red final notice. His coffee sat untouched, growing colder by the minute. His mind replayed the landlord's warning from the previous day, the chants from the protesters, and most vividly, Marcus's words, "We want fairness and respect for everyone." With a heavy sigh, he stood and made his way to the front of the store. The once busy aisles were deserted, save for a few half-empty shelves that seemed to mock him with their emptiness. A faint hum of noise from outside caught his attention, and he peered through the window. The protesters were back, their group even larger than before. Marcus stood near the front, holding a sign that read, "Change starts here." Mr. Grant turned away, rubbing his temples. For years, he had convinced himself that he was running a respectable business, that his methods were just tough love. But now his decisions had brought his livelihood to the brink of collapse. His pride told him to ignore it, to weather the storm, and prove to everyone that he didn't need to change. Yet, a small voice deep inside whispered a different message, one that was harder to ignore with each passing day. The doorbell jingled, pulling him from his thoughts. A middle-aged woman entered, her posture stiff as she approached the counter. Mr. Grant straightened up, attempting to greet her with his usual gruff professionalism. "Good morning. How can I help you?" he asked, forcing a neutral tone. The woman placed a small basket on the counter and looked him in the eye. "I've been coming to this store for years," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But what you did to that young man was wrong. It's not the first time I've seen you act this way, and I've let it slide because it wasn't happening to me. But not anymore." She pushed the basket aside. "I can't shop here until you make this right." Mr. Grant opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The woman's quiet disappointment cut deeper than the loud protests outside. Without another word, she turned and left, leaving him standing there feeling smaller than he ever had in his life. The rest of the day crawled by, each moment heavier than the last. By late afternoon, the protesters were still outside, their chants steady and unwavering. Mr. Grant paced behind the counter, his frustration mounting. He wanted to dismiss it all, to blame the protesters, the customers, the internet, anyone but himself. But the longer he stayed in the empty store, the more the truth crept in. His business was failing because of him, not because of Marcus, not because of social media, but because of his choices. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut, leaving him breathless. By closing time, the crowd outside had thinned, but Marcus remained. He was sitting on a low wall near the sidewalk, scrolling through his phone. Mr. Grant watched him for a long moment, feeling an unfamiliar mix of guilt and curiosity. He didn't know why, but his feet started moving toward the door. Before he could think twice, he stepped outside. The cool evening air wrapped around him, and for a moment the sound of passing cars and distant voices filled the silence between them. Marcus looked up, surprised to see Mr. Grant standing there. His expression was unreadable, but he didn't speak. Mr. Grant began, his voice faltering. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I've been thinking about what you said." Marcus raised an eyebrow but remained silent, waiting for him to continue. Mr. Grant shifted uncomfortably, his hands fidgeting at his sides. Maybe I haven't been fair. To you, to others." The words felt foreign on his tongue, but once they were out, he couldn't stop. "I don't know how to fix it. I don't even know where to start." Marcus studied him for a moment, his expression softening slightly. "Acknowledging it is a start," he said simply. "But it's not enough. You have to be willing to listen, to learn, and to actually change." Mr. Grant nodded, though his heart raced with uncertainty. How do I even begin?" he asked, his voice quieter now. Marcus stood, folding his arms as he looked at the man in front of him. "That's something you have to figure out, but it starts with owning what you've done, to me, to others. And then you do better, consistently." For the first time, Mr. Grant didn't feel defensive or angry. He felt tired of fighting, tired of justifying, tired of the person he had become. As Marcus turned to leave, Mr. Grant called after him. "Will you come back?" "To the store, I mean." Marcus hesitated, then shrugged. "That depends on you, Mr. Grant. Show us that you're serious about changing. Then we'll see." As Marcus walked away, Mr. Grant stood alone in the doorway, the weight of his words sinking in. He didn't know if he could fix everything, but for the first time he felt like he needed to try. That night, Mr. Grant sat at his kitchen table, a notebook and pen in front of him. The store's ledger lay open beside it, but for once, he wasn't focused on numbers or inventory. He stared at the blank page, his mind swirling with thoughts he couldn't quite pin down. The words Marcus had said earlier echoed in his ears. You have to be willing to listen, to learn, and to actually change. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. For decades, Mr. Grant had prided himself on running the store his way, never taking advice from anyone. He believed he knew what was best, that his instincts were always right. But now, with his reputation in ruins and his business teetering on the edge of collapse, he realized he'd been wrong. He picked up the pen, hesitated, and then began to write. The first few words came slowly, awkwardly. What have I done wrong? He stared at the question for a long time, almost hoping the answer would magically appear on the page. But it didn't. With a sigh, he set the pen down and buried his face in his hands. The weight of his past choices felt heavier than ever. The next morning, he arrived at the store earlier than usual. The air was cool and crisp, and for a moment, the quiet street almost felt peaceful. But as he unlocked the door and stepped inside, the emptiness of the store brought him back to reality. The shelves were still half empty, and the faint scent of stale bread lingered in the air. He decided to start small. Picking up his phone, he scrolled through the store's social media pages, wincing at the flood of negative comments. Most were angry, some were mocking, and a few were downright cruel. But among the noise, he found something unexpected: constructive criticism. Comments from people who weren't just angry, but genuinely wanted him to do better. One comment stood out: if Mr. Grant really cares about this community, he'll admit his mistakes and work to rebuild trust. Actions speak louder than words. The words stuck with him as he grabbed a broom and began sweeping the dusty floors, more to distract himself than anything else. The thought of admitting his mistakes publicly terrified him. He wasn't used to being vulnerable, and the idea of putting himself out there, open to more criticism, felt like a risk he wasn't sure he could take. But as the hours passed, a new thought began to take shape. Maybe Marcus and the others weren't asking him to risk something. They were asking him to take responsibility, to show that he cared enough to try. By lunchtime, the decision was made. Mr. Grant wiped his hands on a rag, took a deep breath, and walked outside. The protesters were smaller in number today, but Marcus was there, standing at the edge of the group. He noticed Mr. Grant immediately, his eyes narrowing slightly in curiosity. "I need to talk to you," Mr. Grant said, his voice firm but less confrontational than before. "All of you, actually." The group quieted, their attention turning toward him. Mr. Grant shifted awkwardly under their gazes, but he pressed on. "I've been thinking a lot about what's happened, about what I did. I know I've hurt people, hurt this community, and I want to make it right." A murmur ran through the group. Some looked skeptical, others surprised. Marcus crossed his arms but said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "I've spent years running this store the way I thought was right," Mr. Grant admitted, his voice faltering slightly. "But I see now that I've been blind to a lot of things. I've made assumptions about people. About you," he said, looking directly at Marcus. "And I was wrong." The group fell silent. Even Marcus seemed caught off guard by the admission. Mr. Grant took another deep breath, his hands gripping the edge of the doorway. "I know words aren't enough. I need to show you that I mean it. So I'd like to invite anyone here to come inside. Tell me what you think needs to change. Help me make this place better." For a moment, no one moved. The group exchanged glances, whispering among themselves. Finally, Marcus stepped forward. "You really mean that?" he asked, his tone cautious. Mr. Grant nodded. "I do. I'm not saying I'll get it right overnight, but I want to try, and I'm asking for your help." Marcus studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Let's see if you're serious." As Marcus and a few others stepped inside the store, Mr. Grant felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was moving in the right direction. Inside the store, the atmosphere was tense but quiet. Marcus and a few members of the group walked cautiously through the aisles, their eyes scanning the space. The shelves, half-stocked and dusty, seemed to reflect the crumbling state of the store itself. Mr. Grant stood behind the counter, gripping its edge as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. He didn't know what to expect, but he was determined to listen. "So," Marcus began, stopping in front of a shelf filled with canned goods. "What exactly do you want us to do here, Mr. Grant?" Mr. Grant hesitated, searching for the right words. "I want you to be honest. Tell me what I've done wrong, what needs to change. I can't fix things if I don't know where to start." Marcus raised an eyebrow, his arms crossed. That's not hard to answer. You've treated people in this community like they don't belong here. You've judged us, assumed the worst, and made it clear that you don't trust us. That's not how you run a business that's supposed to serve everyone. A young woman from the group chimed in, her voice firm. And it's not just what happened with Marcus. I stopped coming here months ago because you followed me around like I was going to steal something. I wasn't even shopping for myself. I was picking up groceries for my grandmother. Mr. Grant's face reddened, and he opened his mouth to defend himself, but stopped. He knew she was right. Instead, he nodded slowly. I didn't realize how much harm I was causing, he admitted. But I see it now. I've been wrong, and I want to do better. I just need to know how. Marcus leaned against a nearby shelf, studying Mr. Grant carefully. It's not just about the store, he said. It's about you. If you want people to trust you again, you have to show them that you've changed. That means more than just saying you're sorry. It means being part of this community, not just taking from it. Mr. Grant frowned, the weight of Marcus's words settling over him. He had always seen himself as part of the neighborhood, but now he realized that he had built walls instead of bridges. For years, he had treated his store as his own little fortress, guarding it against people he saw as threats instead of welcoming them in. So, where do I start? He asked, his voice quieter now. What can I do to show people I mean it? Marcus exchanged a glance with the young woman and the others in the group. After a moment, he spoke. First, you need to apologize. Not just to us, but to the whole community. Own what you did and let people know you're serious about making amends. And second, start giving back. This store has been here for decades, but what have you done for the people who've supported it? Mr. Grant felt a pang of guilt. Marcus's words cut deep, but he couldn't deny their truth. You're right, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I haven't done enough for this community, but I want to change that. Tell me how. A small smile tugged at the corner of Marcus's mouth. Well, he said, there's a food drive happening this weekend at the community center. You could start by donating and volunteering. It's a good way to show people that you care. The young woman nodded in agreement. And maybe think about hosting something here, like a neighborhood event or a free meal day. Something that brings people together. Mr. Grant listened intently, nodding as they spoke. The ideas felt daunting, but for the first time he also felt a glimmer of hope. Okay, he said finally. I'll do it. I'll start with the food drive. Marcus straightened, his expression softening slightly. Good. But remember, this isn't a one-time thing. If you're serious about changing, it's going to take time and effort. People are watching, and they won't trust you overnight. I understand, Mr. Grant said, his voice steady. I'm ready to put in the work. As the group prepared to leave, Marcus turned back to him. We'll hold you to that, he said. And for what it's worth, I hope you prove us wrong. Mr. Grant nodded, a mix of determination and nervousness settling in his chest. As the door closed behind them, he stood alone in the quiet store, feeling a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, he believed it might also lead to something better. The next few days passed in a blur for Mr. Grant. His mornings, once spent counting cash and organizing inventory, were now filled with something far less familiar: self-reflection and planning. He made a call to the community center to confirm the details of the food drive Marcus had mentioned, feeling an unusual mix of nerves and determination as he offered to contribute both supplies and his time. Word spread quickly. The news that Mr. Grant, the man who had caused so much anger, was now volunteering, brought mixed reactions. Some were skeptical, dismissing it as a hollow attempt to save face. Others were cautiously optimistic, willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, but waiting to see if his actions would match his promises. On the morning of the food drive, Mr. Grant arrived at the community center with the trunk of his car packed full of canned goods, dry food, and other essentials. He had raided the store's inventory the night before, carefully selecting items that he thought would make a meaningful contribution. As he unloaded the boxes, a few volunteers shot him wary glances, their conversations quieting as they noticed him. Marcus was there too, sorting donations into neat piles. He looked up when Mr. Grant approached, his expression unreadable. "Didn't think you'd show up this early," Marcus said, his tone neutral. "I figured it was the least I could do," Mr. Grant replied, setting down a box. "I wanted to help." Marcus studied him for a moment before nodding. "Well, grab some gloves. We've got a lot of work to do." The hours that followed were unlike anything Mr. Grant had experienced in years. He found himself elbow deep in tasks he never thought he'd be doing, unpacking donations, organizing boxes, and greeting people who came to pick up food. At first, the interactions were stiff. People avoided his gaze or gave curt responses when he tried to make small talk. But as the day went on, something began to shift. A woman approached him with her young son in tow, her eyes filled with a cautious warmth. "Thank you for this," she said softly, nodding toward the bag of groceries she held. "It makes a big difference." Mr. Grant felt a lump in his throat. "I'm just glad I can help," he said, his voice quieter than usual. The boy smiled shyly, clutching a small toy he had picked from a donation bin. For the first time in what felt like forever, Mr. Grant felt a genuine connection to the people around him. By mid-afternoon, he noticed Marcus watching him from across the room. Mr. Grant wasn't sure what the younger man was thinking, but he chose not to dwell on it. Instead, he focused on his work, determined to prove, if not to Marcus then to himself, that he could be better. As the food drive wound down, Mr. Grant found himself standing beside Marcus, stacking the last of the empty boxes. The silence between them was heavy but not hostile. Finally, Marcus spoke. "You did good today." Mr. Grant glanced at him, surprised. "Thanks," he said, his voice almost uncertain. "I'm just trying to make things right." Marcus shrugged. "It's a start. But like I said before, it's not just about today. People will remember what you did before, but they'll also notice what you do now." "I know," Mr. Grant replied, his tone serious. "And I'm not expecting people to forgive me overnight. But I'm willing to keep trying." Marcus looked at him for a long moment before nodding. "Good. Keep showing up. That's how you build trust." As the last of the donations were packed up and the volunteers began to leave, Mr. Grant lingered for a moment, watching the others. There was a warmth in the room, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. For the first time, he realized what he had been missing, not just in his business, but in his life. When he returned to the store that evening, it felt different. The aisles were still quiet and the shelves still sparse, but for the first time, he didn't feel defeated. Instead, he felt a spark of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time: hope. The day after the food drive, Mr. Grant stood behind the counter of his store, staring at a notebook filled with hastily written ideas. The suggestion from one of the protesters about hosting a neighborhood event had been circling in his mind. It wasn't just about apologizing anymore. It was about making people feel welcome again, about proving that he was genuinely committed to change. He spent the morning brainstorming, scribbling down thoughts and crossing most of them out. A free meal day, a discount for regulars, a community meeting in the store. Each idea felt promising for a moment before doubt crept in. He knew he couldn't undo the damage overnight, but he was determined to take action. By midday, he had settled on an idea. He'd host an open house at the store, a day where people could come, share their thoughts, and enjoy refreshments. It wasn't grand or complicated, but it felt right. He wanted to hear from the community, to understand what they needed and how he could better serve them. With a deep breath, he picked up his phone and called the local printer. He ordered flyers to announce the event, making sure to emphasize that it was about listening and reconnecting. He then stepped outside to tape one of the flyers to the store window. As he pressed the tape down, he noticed a few passers-by stopping to read it. Their expressions varied, some skeptical, some curious, but none hostile. It was a small win. That evening, he made another call. this time to Marcus. The phone rang a few times before Marcus picked up, his voice cautious. "Hello, it's Mr. Grant," he said, his words stumbling slightly. "I wanted to let you know I'm hosting an open house at the store this weekend. I'd really appreciate it if you came. I want your input, and your presence might help others feel comfortable coming too." There was a long pause before Marcus spoke. "You're really going through with this?" "Yes," Mr. Grant replied firmly. "I need to. I'm serious about changing, and I want to hear from everyone, especially you." Marcus sighed, his tone softening. "All right, I'll be there, but don't expect this to be easy. People are still angry, and some won't want to talk to you." "I understand," Mr. Grant said, though his stomach twisted at the thought. "Thank you." As he hung up, he felt a flicker of anxiety, but also a sense of determination. This was his chance to prove himself, and he wasn't going to waste it. The day of the open house arrived, and Mr. Grant stood near the entrance of the store, nervously adjusting the tablecloth on a folding table he had set up. It was laden with refreshments, cookies, coffee, and small sandwiches. A sign beside the table read, "Welcome to our community open house. Share your thoughts." He glanced at the clock. The event was scheduled to start in 10 minutes, and so far no one had arrived. His heart sank as he imagined an empty store, his efforts wasted. But just as doubt began to consume him, the doorbell jingled. He looked up to see Marcus stepping inside, his expression guarded but not unkind. "Looks good," Marcus said, nodding toward the table. "You're really pulling out all the stops, huh?" "Trying my best," Mr. Grant replied with a nervous chuckle. "Thanks for coming." Marcus didn't respond immediately, but instead began walking the aisles, taking in the space. As he did, a few more people trickled in. An older woman, a man with his teenage son, and eventually Sophie, the former cashier. Each person glanced around hesitantly before making their way to the table, or sitting in one of the chairs Mr. Grant had set up near the back of the store. The atmosphere was tense at first, the air thick with unspoken questions. Mr. Grant stood at the counter, unsure of how to begin. Finally, Marcus cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Well, Mr. Grant," he said, gesturing toward the small group, "this is your chance. Say what you need to say." Mr. Grant swallowed hard, stepping out from behind the counter. His hands trembled slightly as he clasped them in front of him. "First of all," he began, his voice shaky but sincere, "thank you all for being here. I know it's not easy to walk into a place where you've been treated unfairly, and I'm sorry for the part I played in making that happen." He paused, scanning the room for reactions. Some people nodded slightly, while others remained stone-faced, their expressions unreadable. "I've been running this store the same way for a long time," he continued, "and I didn't realize how much harm I was causing. I made assumptions about people, about you, and I was wrong. I know an apology isn't enough, but I'm here today because I want to listen. I want to know how I can do better." The room was quiet for a moment before Sophie spoke up. "It's not just about saying sorry, Mr. Grant. You need to treat everyone with respect, not just the people you feel comfortable with." "That's right," the older woman chimed in. "I've been shopping here for years, and I've seen how you look at people, especially people like Marcus. That has to change." Mr. Grant nodded, taking their words to heart. "You're right," he said, "and I'm committed to doing better. I want to work with the community, not against it." As the conversation continued, more voices joined in, some offering criticism, others sharing ideas for improvement. Slowly, the tension began to ease. People started to open up, talking about what the store meant to them and how it could become a better part of the neighborhood. By the end of the day, the store was filled with a sense of cautious optimism. As people began to leave, several lingered to thank Mr. Grant or offer encouragement. Marcus approached him last, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You did good today," he said, his tone almost approving. "But like I said before, this is just the beginning." Mr. Grant nodded, feeling the weight of Marcus's words. He still had a long way to go, but for the first time in years, He felt like he was moving in the right direction. The days following the open house were a whirlwind for Mr. Grant. Word of the event spread quickly throughout the neighborhood. Some people praised him for taking the first step, while others remained skeptical, wondering if his newfound humility was genuine or just a desperate attempt to save his failing business. Mr. Grant didn't blame them for their doubts. He knew he had a long road ahead to rebuild trust, and it would take more than one event to prove himself. Determined to follow through, he threw himself into the suggestions he had received during the open house. One of the ideas that stood out was a monthly community day, where the store would host activities like cooking classes, free meals, and forums for people to share their thoughts. It wasn't just about drawing customers back. It was about transforming the store into a place where everyone felt welcome. The first community day was set to happen 2 weeks later, and Mr. Grant spent every spare moment preparing. He stocked the shelves with fresh produce and essentials, using whatever funds he could scrape together to make the store look inviting again. He worked late into the night designing flyers, which he handed out to local residents, and hung on every notice board he could find. As the day approached, he found himself growing nervous. What if no one came? What if the event was a failure? Those fears gnawed at him, but he pushed them aside, focusing on the bigger picture. This wasn't about immediate success. It was about showing the community that he was committed to change. On the morning of the event, the store was transformed. Long tables were set up outside, decorated with colorful tablecloths and laden with trays of food. Inside, a small corner was dedicated to a free pantry, offering basic groceries for families in need. A chalkboard sign at the entrance read, "Welcome to Community Day, a fresh start." As the clock struck 10, Mr. Grant stood by the door, greeting the first few visitors with a mix of nervousness and hope. The turnout started small, but as the hours passed, more and more people arrived. Families, seniors, and even some of the protesters who had once stood against him began to filter in, curious to see what the event was all about. Among the crowd was Marcus, who arrived mid-morning with a group of volunteers from the community center. He watched from a distance at first, observing how Mr. Grant interacted with the guests. To his surprise, the old man seemed genuinely engaged. He greeted everyone with a smile, listened attentively to their feedback, and even rolled up his sleeves to help serve food at one of the tables. "Looks like he's really trying," one of the volunteers muttered, nodding toward Mr. Grant. Marcus didn't reply immediately, his gaze fixed on the man who had once been so dismissive and judgmental. It was a stark contrast to the Mr. Grant he had encountered weeks ago. Deciding to approach, Marcus made his way over to the table where Mr. Grant was chatting with a group of elderly women. When the conversation ended, Mr. Grant turned to see Marcus standing nearby. "Marcus," he said with a small smile, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Glad you could make it." Marcus crossed his arms, his expression neutral. "I wanted to see for myself how serious you are." "And?" Mr. Grant asked, his voice steady but tinged with nervousness. Marcus tilted his head, considering his response. "You're off to a good start," he said finally. "But like I told you before, it's not just about one event. It's about showing up every day, proving to people that you've changed." "I know," Mr. Grant replied, "and I'm ready to do that. This store isn't just mine, it belongs to the community. I see that now, and I want to do right by everyone." For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Marcus extended a hand. "If you're serious, I'm willing to help, but I'll hold you to your word." Mr. Grant hesitated for just a second before shaking Marcus's hand. "I wouldn't expect anything less." As the day went on, the event gained momentum. Children played games on the sidewalk while parents browsed the free pantry. Conversations filled the air, and for the first time in weeks, the store felt alive again. Even Sophie showed up, smiling as she helped distribute supplies to families in need. By the end of the day, Mr. Grant was exhausted but deeply satisfied. The feedback he received was overwhelmingly positive, with many people expressing cautious hope that the store could become a true part of the neighborhood again. As he stood by the door, waving goodbye to the last of the guests, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: gratitude. For the first time, Mr. Grant understood that change wasn't just about fixing his business. It was about fixing himself, and that realization made all the hard work worth it. The success of Community Day marked a turning point for Mr. Grant, but he knew the work was far from over. The following week, he began implementing new policies at the store. One of the first changes was installing a free community board near the entrance, where anyone could post announcements, job opportunities, or upcoming local events. He also introduced a loyalty program that gave discounts to regular customers, something many had suggested during the open house. But perhaps the most significant change was how Mr. Grant treated his customers. Instead of watching them suspiciously or assuming the worst, he greeted everyone with genuine warmth. He made a conscious effort to get to know their names, their families, and their needs. It was a slow process. Some people were still wary, their trust not yet fully rebuilt, but he remained patient. One afternoon, a young mother approached him at the register. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I wasn't sure I'd ever come back here," she admitted. "But my neighbor told me about the community day and, well, I've noticed the changes." Mr. Grant nodded, humbled by her words. "I understand why you'd feel that way. I know I have a lot to make up for, but I'm trying." She smiled faintly. "You are, and it's making a difference." As she left, Mr. Grant felt a flicker of hope. Every interaction like this reminded him why he had started this journey, to repair the damage he had caused, and to earn back the trust of the community he had once taken for granted. Despite the progress, there were still moments of doubt. Not everyone was ready to forgive, and some openly voiced their skepticism. A man who had boycotted the store since the incident with Marcus confronted Mr. Grant one morning, his tone sharp and accusatory. "You think one event and a few nice words can erase what you've done?" he asked, his arms crossed. Mr. Grant didn't flinch. He met the man's gaze and said, "No, I don't. I know trust isn't rebuilt overnight, but I'm not doing this to erase the past. I'm doing this to make sure the future is different." The man seemed taken aback by the response. He didn't say anything else, just gave Mr. Grant a long, searching look before turning to leave. It wasn't the reaction Mr. Grant had hoped for, but he understood. People had every right to feel the way they did, and all he could do was continue proving himself through his actions. Later that day, Marcus stopped by the store to check in. He had become something of a mentor to Mr. Grant, offering guidance and holding him accountable. "You're doing better," Marcus said as he leaned against the counter. "But remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint. People need to see consistency." Mr. Grant nodded, appreciating the reminder. "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly. "This store is part of my life, but more importantly, it's part of theirs. I'm going to keep showing up." As the weeks went on, the changes at the store began to ripple through the neighborhood. Families that had stopped shopping there started to return, drawn by the new atmosphere and the genuine effort Mr. Grant was making. He partnered with the community center to host monthly events, including book drives, school supply giveaways, and even a holiday dinner for families in need. One evening, as Mr. Grant was locking up the store, he spotted Marcus across the street, walking with a group of kids from the community center. Marcus gave him a small nod, and Mr. Grant felt a wave of gratitude. It wasn't just the store that had changed, it was him. For the first time in years, he felt connected to the people around him, not as a distant figure behind a counter, but as someone who truly cared. With every small success, he felt the weight of his past begin to lift. He knew the journey wasn't over, but for the first time, he believed that he was on the right path. And as the lights in the store flickered off, he looked forward to the work that still lay ahead. A few months later, the store had become almost unrecognizable, not in appearance but in atmosphere. The aisles, once quiet and tense, were now lively with chatter and laughter. Customers greeted each other warmly, and Mr. Grant had become a familiar and friendly presence, often seen helping people find items or chatting about their day. The community board near the entrance was filled with colorful flyers, showcasing everything from babysitting services to local art shows. One day, as Marcus walked in, he noticed something that brought a faint smile to his face. A group of children were gathered around a small corner of the store that had been transformed into a kids' spot, stocked with free books and small toys. Mr. Grant was kneeling down, handing a picture book to a little girl who giggled as she thanked him. Marcus approached the counter, watching as Mr. Grant stood and brushed off his knees. "You've been busy," Marcus said, gesturing toward the bustling store. Mr. Grant smiled, the lines on his face softer than they had been months ago. "Busy's good," he replied. "Better than staring at empty aisles." Marcus nodded, his tone more serious now. "You've come a long way, Mr. Grant. People are starting to trust you again. That's not easy to earn." "I know," Mr. Grant said, his voice steady. "But it's worth it. I didn't realize how much I was missing until I started listening to the people around me." Marcus leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "So, what's next?" "You've done a lot, but this can't just stop here." Mr. Grant chuckled. "I don't plan on stopping. The store is just the beginning. I've been thinking about other ways to give back. Maybe sponsor a scholarship fund or start a program to support local businesses." Marcus raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. "That's big." "Well," Mr. Grant said, a twinkle of humor in his eye, "if I've learned anything these past few months, it's that big changes start with small steps." Marcus smiled, his respect for the man now genuine and unwavering. "You're right about that." As they talked, customers continued to come and go, each interaction a quiet testament to the transformation that had taken place. Mr. Grant no longer stood apart from the community, he was a part of it. And for the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose that went far beyond running a business. It was about people, about the lives he could touch and the difference he could make. As the afternoon sun streamed through the store windows, Mr. Grant glanced around, taking in the lively scene. It wasn't perfect, and there was still work to be done. But for the first time, he felt like the store was finally living up to its name, a place for everyone. Months later, as winter began to settle over the neighborhood, Mr. Grant found himself standing outside his store, gazing at the small crowd gathered for the store's first holiday celebration. String lights framed the windows, casting a warm glow over the sidewalk. A table outside was piled with hot cocoa, cookies, and blankets to give away to anyone in need. Laughter and conversation filled the air, a stark contrast to the silence that had once engulfed the store. Families, children, and elders mingled, sharing stories and enjoying the festive atmosphere. Marcus stood nearby, chatting with a group of teenagers from the community center. Sophie had returned as a volunteer, helping to organize the event and greeting customers with her usual warmth. Mr. Grant stepped inside for a moment, his hands brushing against the familiar counters he had once thought defined him. Now, they were just a small part of something much bigger. The store wasn't just a place of business anymore. It was a gathering spot, a resource, and most importantly, a symbol of what could happen when someone truly listened and committed to change. As the evening wound down, Marcus approached him with a plate of cookies and a grin. "You know," Marcus said, "when I first walked into this store months ago, I never thought I'd see it like this. You proved me wrong." Mr. Grant laughed softly, taking the plate. "I proved myself wrong, too. I thought I had it all figured out, but I've learned more in the past few months than I did in decades of running this place." Marcus nodded, his tone thoughtful. "That's the thing about change. It doesn't end. You keep growing, keep learning." Mr. Grant smiled, looking out at the crowd one last time. "I'm starting to see that." The two stood there for a moment, watching as the neighborhood came together, the glow of the lights reflecting off smiling faces. For Mr. Grant, it wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of something new, something better. And as the sound of laughter filled the air, he knew one thing for certain. He was exactly where he was meant to be. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories like this.